I drove through the desert night thinking I'd make my son laugh for once, just a quick stop. A small surprise. The long-term lot by the Federal Transit Station was almost empty. Then I saw an old pickup with fogged-up windows. Something moved inside, and when I stepped closer, I realized my son wasn't alone. He was sleeping back there with his 2 boys. I didn't ask questions in the parking lot. Not yet. I got them out of that truck first. The boys' faces were puffy with sleep. Ethan moved like his joints were made of rust. He kept his voice low, like the night might hear him. "Let's get food," I said. There was a diner off the highway with a flickering sign and a coffee smell that hit you before you opened the door. Vinyl booths, a counter with pie under glass. The kind of place where nobody asks for your story as long as you pay and keep your kids close. I slid the boys into a booth and ordered pancakes and scrambled eggs like it was the most normal morning in the world. Lucas pressed his forehead to the window and watched trucks roll by. Noah asked if we could get orange juice because it's a road trip. Ethan smiled at that. A small smile. The kind you force for your kids, not for yourself. He still had his work boots on. That was the first thing I noticed once we sat down. Not dress shoes, not slippers. Work boots. Scuffed. Dust in the seams. "You been working?" I asked. He nodded once. "Whatever I can get. Deliveries, day jobs, helping a guy at a warehouse 2 towns over. Cash sometimes. Not always." He said it like he was listing the weather. Then his eyes went back to the boys, like he needed to keep checking they were still there. "You shower?" I asked. He hesitated. "Gym," he said. "I pay month to month. It's cheap." He didn't say I'm living out of a truck. He didn't need to. His hands told the story. The way he held his coffee mug like it might be taken away. The boys dug into their pancakes. Syrup everywhere. Laughing when Noah got some on his nose. Ethan leaned in and wiped it off with a napkin. Gentle. Automatic. That's what made it worse. Because he wasn't a man falling apart. He was a father still showing up. And somehow, that still wasn't enough. I waited until the boys were distracted by the little plastic jukebox on the table. Then I leaned forward. "Ethan," I said, "tell me the truth. Once. All of it." He stared at his hands. Then he nodded, like he was signing something again. "I'm not allowed," he said. I didn't understand. "Not allowed to what to have them," he said, and the words came out flat. "Not like this. Not without someone watching. Not overnight. Not—" He stopped. Swallowed. "I'm flagged," he said quietly. "In the county system, flagged. That's a word you hear about stolen cars, about people who skip court, about threats, not fathers." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper that looked like it had been opened and closed 100 times. He slid it across the table. I didn't read the whole thing at first. I didn't need to. My eyes caught 2 phrases. Unstable housing. Not suitable for unsupervised parenting time. I looked up at him. "You're working," I said. "You're sober. You're here. They're fed. They're smiling." He gave me a look that wasn't anger. It was something colder. "It doesn't matter," he said. "They don't care if you're a good dad," he added. And his voice cracked on the last 2 words. He cleared his throat and tried again. "They care if you look stable on paper." He wasn't crying. He was just empty. And that emptiness told me this hadn't happened overnight. This was 3 months of doors closing one by one while he kept trying to be polite about it. I watched him reach over and cut Lucas's pancakes into smaller pieces without thinking, like his body still lived in a home even if the rest of him didn't. "Where's Marissa?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "With her dad," he said. Victor's place. He didn't say mansion. He didn't say estate. But the way he said the name told me what kind of house it was. "Why are the boys with you right now?" I asked. He looked up fast. "Because she was late," he said. "Because her mom didn't show. Because I begged for extra time and they said, 'Okay,' and he cut himself off. And what I asked, and I didn't want to bring them back." He said, "That was the truth. Simple. Ugly. Human." I was supposed to hand them off after the visit. He said, 2 hours. That's what the order says. Someone sits there with a clipboard, writes down how I breathe. He kept his voice low, but his fingers were shaking around the coffee cup. "They call it supervision," he said, "but it feels like they're building a case." He looked at the boys again. "They think we're camping," he said. "I tell them it's an adventure, that we're tough, that we can do hard things." He forced another smile, and it didn't reach his eyes. "Because what am I supposed to tell them?" he whispered. "That their dad is not suitable?" I didn't answer right away. I watched Noah stack the little butter packets into a tower. Lucas knocked it down and laughed. "Kids don't know how close the ground is until they fall." Then I said, "Listen to me." He looked up. And for the first time since I saw him through that fogged-up window, he held my gaze. "There's something people don't understand," I said. "They think the loudest person is the strongest person." I kept my voice calm. Not soft. Calm. "They think if you don't shout back, you're weak. If you don't fight dirty, you can't win." Ethan's eyes dropped again like he was bracing for a lecture. I wasn't giving him one. "I've seen men like Victor," I said. "They mistake silence for surrender, because that's how they live. Noise equals power to them." I leaned in a little. "But silence can mean something else," I said. "Sometimes silence is a man counting exits, saving receipts, watching patterns, waiting until he has what he needs." Ethan let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. I didn't do any of that," he said. "I just kept trying to be reasonable." "I know," I said. "And that's why this worked on you," I added. "Because you believed being reasonable would protect you." The waitress refilled our coffee. She glanced at the boys and smiled like we were just another family on a trip. Then she walked away. Ethan stared at the paper again. "They want me to look unstable," he said. "So they can keep the kids, so they can keep everything." His voice wasn't angry, it was defeated. That scared me more than anger. Because anger means a man still believes he deserves better. Defeat means he's starting to accept the lie. I pushed the paper back toward him. "Finish your coffee," I said. "Let the boys eat." He blinked. "Then we're going to do this the right way," I said. "No screaming, no scenes, no begging." Ethan's mouth opened like he wanted to argue, but nothing came out. I looked at the boys. Lucas was licking syrup off his finger. Noah was humming to himself. "They don't get to decide you're not their father," I said. Ethan's eyes filled, but he wiped them fast with the back of his hand like he was ashamed. I didn't let him sit in that. "This isn't poverty," I said quietly. "This is erasure." He frowned. "They're trying to erase you from your own life," I said. "Paper by paper, report by report, until one day you look around and you believe you did it to yourself." I paused. "And the only way you beat that," I said, "is you stop trying to prove you're good and you start proving what they're doing is wrong." Ethan stared at me like he was hearing language he forgot he knew. I reached for my wallet and set cash on the table. Not because the diner needed it, but because I needed him to see something simple. A man handles what's in front of him. A man doesn't freeze. "After breakfast," I said. "We're getting you and the boys somewhere safe." Ethan shook his head immediately. "Dad, I can't." "Yes, you can," I said. He looked like he wanted to explain the whole world to me in one sentence. "They have lawyers," he said. "They have connections. They have money." I nodded once. "Then we'll use what we have," I said. He stared. "What do we have?" he asked. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't smile. I just said it plainly. "We have time," I said. "We have truth. And starting today," I added, "we're going to have a record. After breakfast." I took the boys outside and walked them to the little patch of gravel behind the diner where the trucks parked. Lucas found a flat rock and tried to skip it across a puddle that wasn't deep enough to skip anything. Noah kept asking if we could see a train. I let them talk. I let them breathe. Then I sent them back inside with a coloring page and told the waitress I'd be right at the counter if they needed anything. Ethan followed me out to the edge of the lot where the wind hit harder. He didn't light a cigarette. He didn't pace. He just stood there, shoulders slightly hunched, like he was waiting for someone to tell him what he already knew. "Start from the beginning," I said. He exhaled through his nose. "The beginning is boring," he said. "That's the problem. It all looked normal." He stared out at the highway like the story was written on the asphalt. "Marissa wanted to clean things up," he said. Her words, clean, simple, organized. He made air quotes. But they were small, like he was embarrassed to even imitate her. "She said we had too many documents," he continued. "Too many bills in both names. Too many accounts. She said it made taxes complicated. She said it made us look messy." He paused. And I believed her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen, then stopped. "I remember the day," he said. "I was tired. I'd been up since 5. Kids had a dentist appointment. My boss was calling." She had papers on the kitchen counter like it was nothing. He swallowed. "Just sign," she said. "I'll handle it." I didn't interrupt. He kept going. It wasn't one paper, he said. It was a stack, not huge, but enough that you don't read every line when the person you married is standing there smiling like it's normal. He looked at me then, and his eyes didn't ask for pity. They asked for understanding. I signed. He said, "That was the first hit. The second hit came fast. One day I came back from a job," he said. "Not even late, just back. And my key didn't work." He rubbed his palm like he could still feel the cold metal. "I thought the lock was broken," he said. I knocked. No answer. I called her. "Straight to voicemail." He laughed once, but it had no humor in it. Then a deputy showed up. He said. I felt my jaw tighten. "A deputy." I repeated. Ethan nodded. He handed me papers. He said, "A restraining order. Temporary. Effective immediately." He said those last 2 words like he'd memorized them. I didn't ask what it said yet. I didn't need to. I knew the tone of those documents. They don't sound like a family. They sound like a threat. What did they claim I asked? Ethan's mouth went tight. That I was unstable, he said. That I was threatening. That I was dangerous around the kids. He looked down at the dirt. "I've never laid a hand on her," he said. "I've never even raised my voice at the boys. I believed him without thinking, the way you believe your own name. But belief doesn't matter to paperwork." "What did they show?" I asked. "Screenshots," he said. "Text messages I supposedly sent. Messages I never wrote." He pulled out his phone and scrolled, then stopped like he couldn't stand looking at it too long. "They were chopped up," he said. "No full thread, no context, just little pieces. Like someone cut out the worst-sounding lines and glued them together." He glanced at me, waiting for me to say it was impossible. I didn't, Who backed her up, I asked. Ethan's shoulders rose a fraction. Her friends, he said, her mom. People who barely knew what went on in our house. He looked out again. They didn't have to know, he said. They just had to repeat the story. That was the third hit, and it was the one that ended him. The custody order came after that. He said, because once you've got a restraining order on paper, the rest is downhill. He didn't say the word automatic, but it hung there. Supervised visits, he said. 2 hours, twice a week, in a public place, with someone watching and writing. He rubbed his face hard with both hands. And the county flagged me, he added. Unstable housing, not suitable for unsupervised parenting time. He said it like he was reciting his own sentence. I stayed quiet long enough that he had to fill the silence. You know what's crazy, he said softly. I still went to work. I still tried to keep my routine. I still paid the gym. I still showed up on time for the visits. He looked at me with something sharp in his eyes. But none of that counts if you don't look stable on paper, he said. In custody fights, the appearance of stability can be stronger than the truth if you don't have a paper trail that proves otherwise. That sentence landed heavy, because it explained the whole trap. If you have money, you can buy stability. You can buy the image. You can buy the story. If you don't, you can be stable and still get labeled as chaos. How did you end up in the truck with the boys, I asked. His jaw tightened again. I didn't plan it, he said. One visit ran late. Her supervisor didn't show up. Marissa said I could keep them a little longer. He shook his head. I took the extra time because I missed them, he said. And when it was time to bring them back, I couldn't do it. He stared at his boots. I thought, if I bring them back, that's it, he said. I go back to being a guy on a list, a guy who needs permission to hug his own kids. He swallowed. So I drove, he said. I drove until they fell asleep in the back, and then I didn't know where to go. The wind picked up and lifted a napkin off the diner table outside. It tumbled across the lot and stuck in a fence. Ethan watched it like it was a lesson. I didn't tell you, he said, because I thought I could fix it before you saw it. I didn't touch him. I didn't need to. I just said, they got ahead of you. He nodded once. They told the story first, he said. And by the time I opened my mouth, everyone was already looking at me like I was the problem. That's when I understood the real theft. They hadn't only taken his house, they hadn't only taken his money, they had taken his place. They had taken his name as a father and replaced it with a label. And Ethan, like too many decent men, had tried to out-polite a machine built to crush you. I looked back toward the diner window. Lucas and Noah were laughing over a crayon that broke in half. Ethan's eyes followed mine. I'm not asking you to fight dirty, I said. He blinked. I'm asking you to stop fighting blind, I continued, because this isn't about who's louder. It's about who can prove what happened. He stared at me, and I saw it just for a second. Something in him that wasn't defeat. It was the start of anger. The useful kind. The kind that doesn't scream. The kind that builds a file. That afternoon, I went back to the truck with Ethan. Not because I wanted to see it again. Because I needed to understand what had been taken. And how. He opened the driver's door and reached behind the seat like he'd done it 1,000 times. A grocery bag with kid snacks, a folded hoodie, a stack of papers inside a crumpled envelope. He handed it to me without looking up. Those are what I have, he said. I flipped through them. A court notice. A visitation schedule. A few receipts from the gym. A pay stub from a warehouse job. And that was it. No bank statements, no business records, no contracts, no email printouts. No paper trail for the money that used to exist, just the leftovers. I looked at him. "Where's the rest?" I asked. He leaned against the truck and stared at the windshield. "She had it," he said. "Marissa handled everything. Bills, accounts, the business mailbox, the logins, all of it." He said it like he was admitting a crime. I trusted her. He added, "I didn't comment on that. I just asked how much he swallowed. At first I thought it was just the house." He said, "Then I realized it was the business too." He reached for his phone again and pulled up an old banking screenshot, one of the few he still had. "I found a transfer," he said. "Not from our personal account, from the business." He held the phone out. A number, a date, a name that wasn't his. It went to a company I'd never heard of. He said, "Then another one?" He looked up at me, and for the first time his voice sharpened. "And both of those companies trace back to Victor," he said. "Victor Cole." He didn't have to say my father-in-law. The name carried its own weight. I stayed quiet. Ethan kept going. "She didn't take money like a burglar," he said. "She took it like an accountant." He tapped the screen. "Small amounts at first," he said. 500, 1,000, a vendor payment, a consulting fee. Stuff I wouldn't question because I was busy, working, being a dad." He shook his head slowly. "Then one bigger transfer," he said. "Right before the restraining order, I felt my hands tighten around the envelope. 'So she moved money,' I said. 'And then she moved the story.'" Ethan nodded. "And once the story moved," he said, "everything else moved with it." He looked away. "I couldn't even prove what was mine," he said, "because I didn't have access to the accounts anymore. The logins changed. The emails were gone. The business address was changed." He paused. "And the worst part is, it all looked clean. Clean." That word again. That's when it hit me. This wasn't rage. This wasn't a messy breakup. This was paperwork. It was forms and signatures and polite smiles in front of clerks. It was the kind of harm that doesn't leave bruises. It leaves you standing outside your own home, holding a piece of paper that says you don't belong there. Ethan watched me read the court notice again. Then he said, very quietly, "People keep asking me why she'd do it." He didn't ask it like a question. He said it like he'd heard it too many times. And I knew what he meant. Because if you don't explain the motive, people start filling in the blanks, they start calling the story fake, or they start blaming the victim. They say, "He must have done something." They say, "No mother would do that." So let me say this plainly. A lot of the worst things in life don't happen because someone is screaming in your face. They happen because someone is calm. They happen because someone decided you were in the way, and then they got organized. Ethan's jaw tightened. "She didn't look angry," he said. "When she handed me those papers, she wasn't furious. She wasn't crying. She was practical." He stared at the dirt, like she was closing a deal. He said. I nodded once. Because that's exactly how it works sometimes. And if you've never seen it up close, it sounds unbelievable. How can a mother do that, people ask? How can you have kids with a man and then try to destroy him? Here's the part nobody wants to hear. It usually isn't one emotion. It's layers. And when those layers stack up, the person stops seeing you as a human being. They start seeing you as an obstacle. First layer is power. When someone realizes they can control the story, control the paperwork, control how you look to other people, they start to believe they're allowed to do whatever it takes. Not because they hate you, because they think you're weak enough to survive it. Second layer is backup. It's one thing to have a bad impulse. It's another thing to have a family behind you with money, lawyers, and a moral compass that points toward winning. When the people around you keep saying, "You're right," even when you're not, the line between right and wrong gets blurry fast. You don't need a villain speech. You just need a room full of people who benefit from your victory. And then there's the third layer, the most dangerous one. They separate the kids from your humanity. They stop thinking, "This is their father." And they start thinking, "This is a problem we need to manage." Once you become a problem on paper, the kids become a tool, a reason, a shield, a weapon. That's how a mother can do something that looks impossible from the outside. Not because she wakes up and decides to be evil, but because she takes one cold step, then another, and another, and each step gets stamped and filed and signed until it feels legitimate. That's the kind of evil that scares me. Not the kind that yells, the kind that smiles at the clerk and says, "Where do I sign?" Ethan stared at the truck bed like he couldn't breathe. "I kept thinking if I just stayed calm," he said. "If I didn't make it ugly, it would stop." He laughed once, bitter. "But calm didn't stop it," he said. "Calm just made me easier to push. I didn't argue. I didn't tell him to be angrier. I just said, 'This isn't about yelling.'" He looked up. "It never was." I continued. "They didn't beat you with noise. They beat you with paper." I held up the envelope. "And paper can be answered," I said. "But not with feelings. With records." Ethan's eyes flicked to the diner in the distance where his sons were still coloring at the table. "They're still laughing," he said softly. "Yeah," I said. "And that's why we don't waste time trying to understand her heart before we protect theirs." I took the envelope from his hand and slid it back inside like it was the first brick in a wall. "Here's what we're going to do," I said. "We're going to rebuild what she deleted." Ethan swallowed. How he asked. I looked at him. "The same way she did it," I said, "step by step. But with the truth." That night, I didn't sit around debating what was fair. Fair doesn't feed kids. Fair doesn't change a county file. I checked into a cheap motel on the edge of town. 2 beds, a stiff blanket, a humming AC unit that never quite warmed the room. Lucas and Noah treated it like a fort. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall like he was trying to remember what stability felt like. I opened my phone and started moving. First, I found a rental, not a nice one, not a look-what-I-can-afford one, a simple, single-story place near a public school. Clean, safe, close. I signed the lease the next morning. Then I bought what mattered. 2 twin beds, a small kitchen table, a couch that didn't sag, a few plates, a few cups, toothbrushes, backpacks, the basics, the things you can photograph without saying a word. Because in fights like this, your first move isn't to sue, it's to build living proof of stability. Ethan tried to argue with me. "Dad, this is too much," he said. I didn't raise my voice. "It's not extra," I said. "It's evidence. We moved in that afternoon. Lucas carried a pillow like it was a treasure." Noah ran from room to room counting closets. Ethan stood in the doorway and didn't step inside for a second, like he was afraid it would disappear if he believed in it. I walked past him, set my keys on the counter, and turned on the lights. "Welcome home," I said. He nodded, but he didn't speak. The next morning, I took the boys to the school office. No big speech, just paperwork. I filled out enrollment forms with Ethan sitting beside me, hands folded, jaw tight. The receptionist asked for proof of address. I slid the lease across the counter. She asked for immunization records. Ethan had them in a folder, creased at the corners from being carried around for weeks. She smiled at the boys. "First grade," she asked. Lucas nodded like it was an honor. Noah asked if the cafeteria had chocolate milk. I watched Ethan's shoulders drop half an inch when she didn't look at him like a threat. Small things matter when your life has been turned into allegations. After we left, I took Ethan straight to a clinic. Not because I thought he was unstable, because the file said he was, and I needed something stronger than my opinion. A basic checkup, a calm evaluation, a clean note, no drama, just a professional saying, in plain words, that the man sitting in front of them was functioning. Then I drove him to a temp agency. Not because he couldn't work, because work on record is different than work in survival mode. A schedule, a supervisor, pay stubs you can print, hours you can point to. By the end of the week, Ethan had a job that wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and steady is a weapon. That's when I made my next call, Daniel Price. An old friend of mine, the kind of man who never talks too much because he's always listening. He picked up on the second ring. "Robert," he said, "you don't call unless it's serious." "It's serious." I said, "I need you to look at something. I don't do feelings." Daniel said, "I do facts." "Perfect," I told him. That night, he met me at the kitchen table. He didn't bring sympathy. He brought a laptop and a legal pad. Ethan sat across from him. Quiet, arms crossed like he didn't trust anyone in a chair. Daniel asked one question. "Where did the money go?" Ethan shook his head. "I don't know," he said. "I just know it left." Daniel nodded like that was enough. He asked for everything Ethan did have, every email screenshot, every old invoice, any bank alert, every letter from the county. Ethan slid the thin stack across the table like it embarrassed him. Daniel didn't judge the stack. He just started making a list. What accounts did you use? What payroll service? Who filed your taxes last year? What's the business name? Exactly. Any vendors you remember. He wasn't interrogating Ethan. He was rebuilding a map. And as he talked, I saw Ethan change, not dramatically, just enough. His eyes started tracking the conversation instead of running from it. After an hour, Daniel leaned back. "This isn't random," he said. He tapped his pen on the paper. "2 companies," he continued. "Both receive transfers. Both have clean names. Both look like vendors." He looked at me. "Vendors don't hide," he said. "Shells do." Ethan swallowed hard. "Can you prove it?" he asked. Daniel didn't promise anything. "I can trace patterns," he said. "And patterns are how you catch people who think they're invisible." The next morning, I called Angela Brooks. I didn't pick her because she was loud. I picked her because everyone who mattered kept saying the same thing about her. She doesn't play for drama. Her office was plain. No fancy art, no aggressive slogans, just files and a quiet woman in a blazer who looked like she'd heard every lie 100 times. She didn't shake Ethan's hand like he was fragile. She shook it like he was a client. Then she sat down and said, "Start at the beginning." Ethan began explaining the signatures, the lock change, the restraining order, the screenshots, the supervised visits, the county flag. Angela didn't interrupt. She took notes. When he finished, she flipped her pen closed and looked at him. "You didn't lose because you were a bad father," she said. Ethan's eyes lifted. "You lost because they controlled the narrative first," she continued. "And you didn't have counter records ready." She turned to me. And because once a court hears the word unstable, the burden shifts. She said, "Not fair, but real." She asked for 3 things: proof of housing, proof of employment, proof of consistent parenting involvement. I slid the lease across the desk. I slid the school enrollment confirmation across the desk. I slid the new pay stubs across the desk. Angela didn't smile, but her eyes changed. "Good," she said. This is how you start. Ethan looked like he wanted to ask the question he'd been carrying in his chest. Is it too late? He said. Angela didn't soften her voice. No, she said. But you stop reacting, and you start documenting. She leaned forward. And you need to understand something, she said. In custody disputes, the image of stability can beat the truth if you don't have a paper trail that proves the truth. Silence filled the room. Ethan nodded once. Slow, like he was finally hearing the rules of a game he'd been forced to play. When we walked out, he didn't look lighter. He looked focused. That night, back at the house, Lucas and Noah fell asleep in real beds. Ethan stood in the doorway again, watching them. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just reached up and adjusted the blanket on Noah's shoulder like it was a promise. I watched him for a second. Then I went to the kitchen table and opened a folder. Because now we weren't just surviving, we were building a case. A week later, the county approved Ethan's first supervised visit. Not at our house, not at a park near the school. At a public place they picked. A plain building off a main road, bright lights, plastic chairs, a check-in window. There was a schedule, a start time, an end time, and a list of rules that read like they were written for someone dangerous. No raised voice, no discussing the case, no inappropriate topics, no physical affection beyond what was reasonable. They didn't say what reasonable meant. They never do. We got there early. Ethan wore a clean shirt and kept his hands in his pockets like he didn't trust them. Lucas and Noah held on to his sleeves. They weren't scared. They were excited, like this was a field trip. A woman at the desk glanced at the file, then at Ethan. Her eyes stayed on him a little too long. Then she stamped a form and pointed to a room with a small table and 2 cameras in the corners. Someone will be observing, she said, like she was talking about weather. Ethan nodded once, not because he agreed, because he knew what nodding bought him. We walked in. The supervisor sat in a chair near the door with a clipboard. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't smile at the boys. She just wrote. Lucas climbed onto Ethan's lap without asking permission. Noah pulled a toy car from his pocket and started rolling it across the table. Ethan froze for half a second, then wrapped an arm around Lucas like he'd been holding his breath for months. I sat in the corner and watched, not with anger, with attention, because anger doesn't make a record. Attention does. When the hour was over, the supervisor stood up and said, "Time." Lucas hugged Ethan hard. Noah asked, "Can we come back tomorrow?" Ethan didn't answer. He just kissed the top of Noah's head and stood up slowly, like standing was the hardest part. We walked out, in the parking lot. Ethan leaned against the side of my truck and looked down at his shoes. He didn't say a word the whole drive home. That night, Angela called. Every supervised visit becomes a story. She said, either your story or theirs. I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew. She continued, calm as always. The reports they write carry weight. Judges read them like they're neutral. She paused. They're not always neutral. I stared at the kitchen table where our folder was getting thicker by the day. So what do we do, I asked. We document. Angela said, legally, cleanly, no theatrics. She told me exactly what mattered. Dates, times, locations, who was present, and anything that could be verified later. People aren't afraid of the truth, she said. They're afraid of what you can prove. The next morning, I went to an auto shop and had a dash camera installed. Not something fancy, something reliable, time-stamped. audio included. Then I bought Ethan a small recorder and showed him how to use the voice memo on his phone. No secret filming. No hiding it in someone's purse. Just recording what we were allowed to record. Our drive, our arrival, our check-in, our exit, and Ethan's own notes right after. What was said, what happened, what the boys did. Because memory gets attacked first, paper holds longer. On the next visit, I did something simple. Before we walked in, I said, "Ethan, tell me the time." He looked at his watch. 2:53. He said. I repeated it out loud, so the camera caught it. We walked in, checked in, sat down. Same supervisor, same clipboard, same blank face. Lucas asked if his dad could come to his school event. Noah asked if they could bring their model airplane next time. Normal kid questions. Ethan answered like a father. Calm, patient. No promises he couldn't keep. No talk about court, just presence, halfway through. Lucas bumped his knee on the chair. He didn't cry. He ran to Ethan and climbed up automatically, like a kid who knows where safety is. Ethan rubbed his leg and kept talking. The supervisor watched, wrote something, didn't look up. When time was up, we left. In the parking lot, Ethan hit record on his voice memo and said, quietly, "Visit ended at 4 p.m. Boys were happy. No issues." He didn't add emotion, he didn't add commentary, just facts. After 3 visits, the first report came in. Angela forwarded it to us. It said Ethan was distant. It said the children were reserved. It said the interaction lacked warmth. Warmth. Like you can measure it with a ruler. Ethan read it twice, then handed it back to me like it burned. I held my son when he got hurt. He said. I nodded. I know. I told him. And then I pulled up the dash cam audio. The clip caught Lucas laughing so hard he snorted. It caught Noah asking for chocolate milk. It caught Ethan telling them, "We'll build that plane together." It caught the boys calling him Dad like it was the easiest word in the world. No fear, no hesitation, no distance, just children with their father. We didn't celebrate, we didn't rant, we just put the report in the folder, and right behind it, we placed our own record, dates, times, notes, and clips labeled by visit. Angela looked through everything the next day. She didn't react. She just started connecting dots. They're using supervision as a weapon. She said, "Write a cold report. Paint a picture. Keep the restrictions." She tapped the paper with her finger. "And your breakthrough won't be a speech." She tapped the video file name next. "It'll be the contradiction. Because that's how this works. They can call you unstable. They can call you dangerous. They can write whatever fits their story. But when their story meets a timestamp, when their words meet a recording, when their reserved meets a child laughing on camera, that's when things start to crack. And it always cracks the same way. Not with shouting. With proof." After the third supervised visit, Ethan stopped talking on the drive back. Not because he had nothing to say, because he didn't trust his own words anymore. That night, I heard the shower run longer than it needed to. Then silence. Then the bathroom door creaked open. Ethan walked out with his hair still wet, towel around his neck, and his phone in his hand like it weighed too much. He didn't sit down right away. He just stood by the hallway mirror and stared at himself. Like he was trying to recognize the man looking back. I didn't ask what was wrong. I already knew the feeling. It's the moment when your life turns into paperwork, and the paperwork starts to feel more real than you. Ethan finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "Dad, what if they're right? I looked up from the table. He didn't meet my eyes. He kept staring at the mirror. What do you mean?" I asked. He swallowed. "They keep saying I'm unstable, that I get angry, that I'm unsafe. He held up the report Angela had forwarded us, the one with words like distant and lacking warmth. And then the supervisor writes it down like it's a fact. He laughed once, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. "I'm sleeping in a truck," he said. "I'm working whatever I can. I'm trying to keep the boys clean, fed, on time." His voice tightened. "And somehow, I'm the problem." I didn't interrupt. I watched his hands. They were shaking just slightly, like he was holding something in place. He kept going. At first I thought, okay, it's just a tactic. They're exaggerating. He looked down. But then, everyone around her says it. Her lawyer says it. The reports say it. The county file says it. He tapped the paper with his finger. And after a while, you start thinking. He stopped. He didn't finish the sentence, because finishing it would make it real. The next morning, we sat at the kitchen table before the boys woke up. Angela was coming by later. Daniel was working through bank records and corporate filings. Everything was moving, but Ethan was stuck. He stared at his coffee like it was a test he couldn't pass. I said, "Do you remember what you told me in that diner?" He looked up. I kept my voice even. "You said you didn't yell. You said you didn't threaten. You said you didn't do any of the things they wrote down." He nodded. "But you also said you started wondering if you should get evaluated." His eyes dropped. That was the part that scared me, not the accusation, the doubt. Because that's where gaslighting lives. It doesn't live in screaming. It lives in repetition. It lives in a system that keeps saying the same thing until you stop arguing and start adjusting yourself to fit the lie. Ethan rubbed his forehead. "I don't know anymore," he said. "Some days I feel normal." Then he looked at me. "And some days I wake up and my chest is tight, and I can't think straight, and I'm snapping over stupid things." He shook his head. And then I hear her voice in my head like, "See, this is why you can't have them." He didn't cry. He didn't raise his voice. He just said it like a man admitting something he hates admitting. And I could see what was happening. He wasn't losing a court case. He was losing his right to trust his own mind. Gaslighting isn't someone tricking you once. It's someone building a world where every road leads back to the same conclusion: you're the problem. At first, you reject it, then you argue with it, then you get tired, and when you're tired, you start negotiating with it. Maybe I should have handled that conversation differently. Maybe I should have been calmer. Maybe I should have known she'd twist it. Maybe I am too emotional. Maybe I am unstable. And the scariest part is, the more you try to prove you're not crazy, the crazier you look, because you're reacting to something nobody else can see. That's why people on the outside say, "Just fight back." They don't understand. A man who's been gaslit doesn't need motivation. He needs an anchor, someone outside the fog who can point to the horizon and say, "That's real." Ethan took a breath and said, "Dad, what if I'm doing damage to the boys without realizing it?" That's when I stood up. I didn't give him a speech. I didn't say, "You're amazing, you're strong, you'll get through this." That kind of talk bounces off a man who's been painted as a monster. I walked around the table. I put my hand on the back of his chair, and I said one sentence, slow and flat. "You're not crazy?" He looked up like he didn't believe he'd heard it. I didn't blink. "You're being bent," I said. "That's different." He opened his mouth, like he was about to argue with me. I cut it off. "Look at your boys," I said. "When they see you, do they flinch?" He shook his head. "Do they hide behind me?" "No." "Do they call you Dad like they're afraid of you?" His eyes watered, just a little. "No. That's the truth," I said. "Not the report." He sat there breathing like he'd been underwater and just came up for air. A minute later, the boy's bedroom door opened. Lucas padded out in socks, rubbing his eyes. Noah followed, clutching a small toy plane. They saw Ethan at the table and ran to him without hesitation. No permission, no fear, just instinct. Lucas climbed into his lap. Noah leaned on his shoulder, and Ethan's hands moved automatically, steady now, holding them like he'd never stopped. That was the moment I wanted him to remember. Not what her lawyer wrote, not what a supervisor checked off, what his kids did when they had a choice. Later that afternoon, Angela arrived with a new stack of documents. She spread them across the table like she was laying out parts for a machine. "This is what we're filing," she said. "Not dramatic, not emotional, just precise. Financial records, school enrollment, housing lease, time-stamped footage, witness statements from people who'd actually seen Ethan with his sons, and the supervised visit logs, with our notes, with our clips, with the contradictions highlighted." Angela looked at Ethan and said, "They've been winning on narrative." She tapped the folder. "We're going to make it about evidence." Ethan nodded, slower than usual, but it was a real nod. Not surrender, alignment. Because for the first time in months, he wasn't trying to prove he was a good man. He was building a record that made it impossible to pretend he wasn't. And that's when the case stopped being only about custody. It became about something deeper, getting his name back, getting his mind back, getting to look in a mirror and recognize himself again. The hearing was on a Tuesday morning. County courthouse, fluorescent lights, a room that smelled like old paper and coffee that had been sitting too long. I wore the same jacket I wore to work meetings, not to impress anyone, just to remind myself this wasn't a fight in a parking lot. This was a fight inside a system. Ethan sat beside me. Angela sat on his other side, a thin folder in front of her. Not thick, not dramatic, just organized, across the aisle. Marissa sat with her attorney. Victor Cole was there too, a row behind them, like he was watching a business presentation. He didn't look at Ethan. He looked at the judge, like this was something he expected to control. The judge started with the usual time constraints, best interests of the children, a reminder that emotions don't help. Angela didn't react. She waited, because Angela wasn't there to argue feelings. She was there to argue facts. Marissa's attorney went first. He spoke in clean, polished sentences. He used words like instability and concern. He talked about patterns. He talked about risk. And he kept circling back to one thing. The children need their mother, like it was the end of every conversation. Then he slid a stack of supervised visit summaries toward the judge. Highlighted, underlined, carefully framed. I watched Ethan's jaw tighten. Not anger. That old shame. The one they were trying to drag back onto his face. And for a moment, I could feel the room leaning toward the story they wanted to sell. Not because it was true, because it sounded familiar. A calm mother, a troubled father, a simple narrative. Angela stood when it was her turn. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't insult anyone. She didn't even look at Marissa. She looked at the judge. And then she said, "Your Honor, I'm going to do this in 2 parts. First, the money, then, the children. That was it. No speech, no outrage, just structure." She opened her folder, pulled out 1 page, held it up. "Let's start with the funds that were removed from Mr. Hale's accounts." Marissa's attorney shifted in his chair. Angela didn't rush. She asked the first question like she already knew the answer. "Where did the money go?" Marissa's attorney objected. "Relevance." Angela didn't flinch. "It goes to motive," she said. "And it goes to credibility." The judge allowed it. Angela nodded once. Then she placed a chart on the table. Not fancy, just clean. Dates, amounts. 2 company names, both newly formed, both with the same registered agent. Angela pointed to the first transfer. On this date, $18,400 moved from a joint account into a company called Mesa Ridge Consulting. She didn't say stolen. She didn't say fraud. She let the numbers sit in the air. Then she pointed to the next line. 2 days later, $9,700 moved into Dry Creek Holdings. She paused, and then it moved again. A third transfer, a fourth, same circle, same names, same pattern. She looked at Marissa. Ms. Cole, do you recognize these companies? Marissa said she didn't. Angela didn't argue. She just turned a page. Then maybe you recognize who signed for them. She placed a document on the table. Articles of organization. A signature block. Angela didn't read the name out like it was a mic drop. She said it calmly. This was filed under a relative of Mr. Victor Cole. Victor's posture changed. Just slightly. Not panic. Annoyance. Like someone had brought up something they weren't supposed to mention in public. Marissa's attorney tried to pivot. Your Honor, the issue today is custody, not business filings. Angela nodded. I agree. Then she said, custody relies on credibility, and credibility relies on whether someone has been truthful with the court. Silence. Angela didn't need to accuse anyone. She just needed the judge to see the shape of it. Systematic, coordinated, not a misunderstanding, not a messy divorce, a plan with paperwork behind it. Then Angela moved to the next question. The court has been told Mr. Hale is unstable. She didn't say false. She said, the court has been told. Let's examine the basis for that claim. She lifted the supervised visit report. One line was circled, Father appeared distant. Angela looked at the supervisor's statement. Then she looked at the judge. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to present objective footage from the same visit. Marissa's attorney objected again. Privacy. Chain of custody. Angela was ready. Time-stamped, recorded in a public space, within the rules. The judge allowed a brief viewing. Angela connected a device. The screen faced the bench, and the room changed. It wasn't dramatic music. It wasn't a confession. It was just reality. Lucas ran toward Ethan the moment he saw him. No hesitation, no flinch, no fear. Noah followed, laughing, talking over his own words the way kids do when they're excited. Ethan knelt down, arms open. The boys hit him like a wave, hugging his neck, climbing onto his shoulders. Then you could hear Ethan's voice. Soft. Steady. Hey, buddy. Easy. Easy. I got you. Marissa's attorney shifted again. He tried to lean into the emotion. Children can bond with a parent and still be at risk. Angela cut in. Still calm? Then show the risk. That was the line that landed. Not because it was aggressive, because it was fair. If Ethan was dangerous, there should be evidence of danger, not adjectives, not vibes, not someone's interpretation of warmth. Angela played another clip, a longer one. Ethan helping Lucas with his jacket, Ethan asking Noah what he learned at school, Ethan saying, we don't lie, we don't hit, we don't take what isn't ours, not performative, just normal father talk. Then Angela paused the video and held up the supervisor's report again. Now I'm going to read one sentence. She read it. Father showed limited affection. She looked at the judge. Then she said, Your Honor, this is the problem. A narrative is being submitted as a fact, and the court has been asked to treat it like evidence. She didn't say they're lying. She said, it doesn't match what happened. And that's the kind of contradiction you can't argue your way out of. Because you can't out-talk a timestamp. You can't out-feel a recording. Marissa's attorney tried one last pivot. He leaned on the oldest line in the room. The mother is the primary caregiver. Angela nodded. I'm not here to erase the mother, she said. I'm here to stop the court from erasing the father. She turned back to the judge. And I want to make one thing clear. Feelings matter. They matter deeply. But in this courtroom... She tapped the folder. Feelings only have weight when the data supports them. That was the moment I realized the climax wasn't going to be a gavel. It was going to be a quiet shift. When the judge stopped looking at the story and started looking at the record, the judge asked a few questions, not angry, just precise, about the transfers, about the filings, about the discrepancies. And for the first time, Marissa didn't look confident. She looked careful, like she was measuring every word, because in a fight built on narrative, the most dangerous thing isn't anger. It's documentation. And in that room, with those pages and those clips, the power started moving. Not to the loudest person, to the person who could prove what they were saying. 2 days after court, Daniel called me at 6 in the morning. He never called at 6. He texted, he emailed, he showed up. Quiet. So when my phone rang that early, I sat up before it finished the second ring. Robert, he said. I found the lever. I didn't ask what he meant. I just said, where? Your kitchen, he said. I'll be there in 20. When Daniel walked in, he didn't look excited. He looked focused, like a man holding a match, standing next to a gas line. He set his laptop down on the table, pulled out a folder, and then he slid one single page toward me. On the top, it had a project name I'd seen in local papers, a county redevelopment deal, industrial lots, infrastructure, a new logistics corridor, the kind of thing people in town argued about at diners like it was football. Daniel tapped the page. Victor Cole needs this project, he said. I looked at him. Daniel nodded once, not once. Needs. His cash is tied up. He's got lenders watching, partners watching. And this project is the clean headline that keeps the whole thing standing. He turned his laptop toward me and pulled up a diagram. Boxes, arrows, names I didn't recognize, and then one box, way off to the side, circled in red. A land trust. Old, quiet, local. I stared at the name and felt something familiar, like seeing a tool you forgot you owned, because I recognized it, not from money, from memory. That trust, Daniel said, has voting power, not direct, not obvious, but enough to slow things down, enough to force questions, enough to make meetings uncomfortable. I leaned back, and for a second, I could hear my own voice from years ago. Not in a courtroom, not in a boardroom, in a small office with a folding chair and a pen that barely worked. I remembered a man explaining something in plain English. This isn't about getting rich, Robert, he'd said. This is about keeping locals from getting pushed out. Back then, I didn't have much. I had a steady job, a paid-off truck, a habit of saving more than spending. I put a small amount in, not enough to brag about, not enough for anyone to notice, just enough to be part of it. Then I forgot about it, because life happened. Work, family, bills, time. Daniel sat across from me and watched my face change. He knew what I was thinking. You didn't get rich overnight, he said. You got patient. I didn't answer right away. I stared at the paper, and then I said, So what does this mean? Daniel didn't smile. He pointed to another page in the folder. Meeting schedules, council procedures, the boring stuff, the stuff nobody talks about in dramatic stories. This means, he said, "You can request a review. You can call for documentation. You can force a compliance check. And once the county starts asking questions, Victor can't keep everything sealed." He paused, especially not with what Angela just showed in court. I felt my stomach tighten. Not with anger, with clarity. Because this wasn't a fantasy where I walk into Victor's office and slam my fist on his desk. That's not my style. And it wouldn't help Ethan. What Ethan needed wasn't a louder fight. He needed the ground to stop moving under his feet. Daniel kept talking. "Victor has been using influence," he said. "Not just money, social pressure, relationships, favors. That's how he got people to treat Ethan like a problem. And now..." He tapped the paper again. "You have something he can't buy with a handshake. A process, a vote, a mechanism, a door that only opens if you have the right key." I picked up the page and held it in my hands. It felt too simple for how heavy it was. One small investment from years ago, one signature. One quiet yes I'd forgotten I ever said, and now it was sitting on my kitchen table like it had been waiting. I looked at Daniel. "Are you telling me I can stop his project?" Daniel shook his head. "No." He leaned in. "I'm telling you, you can make him visible." That word hit harder than I expected. Visible. Because that was the whole problem. Victor operated in the dark, not illegal dark. Respectable dark. The kind where everything looks clean because nobody is allowed to look too closely. Daniel sat back. "And here's the part you need to decide," he said. "If you use this, it's not revenge, it's not personal, it's procedural. And when you pull a procedural lever on a man like Victor..." He exhaled. "He reacts." I nodded slowly, because I understood that kind of man. They don't fear yelling. They don't fear insults. They fear paperwork that opens doors. I stood up and walked to the sink. Just to move, just to breathe. Out the window, the street looked the same as it did yesterday. Kids' bikes. A trash can tipped slightly to the side. A quiet neighborhood living a quiet life. And that's all I wanted. Quiet, order, a fair chance for my son to be a father. I turned back to the table. Daniel was waiting. Not pushing, not selling it, just waiting. Because he knew this wasn't about winning a game. It was about choosing a kind of power. I sat down, opened the folder again, and I said, "What's the first step?" Daniel answered like he'd rehearsed it 100 times. "A formal request," he said. "An agenda item. A motion for review. No threats, no drama, just steps." I nodded. Then I said the part that mattered most to me. "We're not doing this to hurt anyone," I said. Daniel's eyes stayed on me. "We're doing this to make the system do its job." He gave a small nod. "That's the only way it sticks," he said. "And that's the twist people never see coming. Not because it's flashy. Because it's real. I didn't become powerful overnight. I didn't pull a secret fortune out of a safe. I opened a door I built a long time ago, and I walked through it, calmly. Because when you're protecting your family, you don't need rage. You need leverage, and you need it to be legal. The ruling changed on a Wednesday. Not with a slam of a gavel, not with anyone yelling. It changed because Angela walked in with folders that were thicker than the stories being told about my son. Ethan sat beside me in a borrowed button-down. His hand stayed flat on his knees. He didn't look at Marissa. He didn't look at Victor. He looked straight ahead like he was trying not to breathe too loud. Angela stood up when it was her turn. She didn't perform. She didn't argue feelings. She just placed the facts where they belonged. First came the recordings. Not the kind that break laws, the kind that prove patterns, dates, times, supervised visits, the same location, the same staff, the same kids, running to their father like nothing was wrong. Angela played a clip. Lucas laughed. Noah asked for a snack. Ethan's voice stayed calm. No raised tone, no threats, no unstable man, just a dad. Then Angela held up the written report from the supervisor, the one that said the children were withdrawn, the one that suggested they were fearful. Angela didn't call it a lie. She didn't need to. She just put it next to the footage and let the room do the math. The judge watched in silence. Then came the money. Angela didn't walk in claiming theft like it was a headline. She walked in with a timeline, 2 companies, 2 transfers, the same names showing up on paperwork that had nothing to do with Ethan. The trail wasn't a smoking gun. It was something more useful. It was repeatable, verifiable, uncomfortable. And when something is verifiable, people stop treating it like gossip. Angela asked Marissa simple questions. Where did the funds go? Who approved the transfer? Which account received it? Where is the contract? Where is the invoice? Marissa answered the way people answer when they're used to winning with emotion. She talked about stress. She talked about fear. She talked about being a mother. Victor's lawyer tried to pull it back to the safest place. Feelings. Your Honor, he said, the children need stability with their mother. The father has been unstable. Angela didn't flinch. She didn't attack Marissa. She didn't humiliate her. She just said, stability is not a speech, it's a record. Then she turned to the judge and asked for something very specific. Reduced supervision, a balanced schedule, clear rules, documentation, no more vague accusations floating around like fog. The judge looked down at the files again. And that's when I understood something I didn't know at the parking lot. In court, emotion can open the door, but only evidence gets you through it. The order was temporary, but it mattered. Supervised visits were reduced, some restrictions were lifted. Ethan wasn't treated like a danger by default anymore. The judge didn't declare anyone a villain. He didn't need to. He simply corrected the imbalance. And when we walked out of that building, there wasn't cheering, there wasn't victory. There was just Ethan exhaling like he'd been holding his breath for months. That night, we didn't celebrate. We ate takeout at the kitchen table. The boys lined up fries like they were building a tiny fence. Ethan watched them. Quiet. Then he said, "So, that's it." He didn't mean the court. He meant the fight. I shook my head. "No," I said, "that's the first time the system looked at you instead of a story." Ethan stared at his hands for a long moment. Then he said something that stuck with me. I wanted to win so bad. He said, "I wanted them to be embarrassed." I looked at him, and I understood. Because when someone tries to erase you, a part of you wants to erase them back, but that's not how you build anything that lasts. So I said the only thing I knew was true. If you win by humiliation, I told him, you're still chained to them. If you win by structure, you can walk away. That's what people get wrong about power. They think power is volume. They think it's rage. They think it's making sure the other person hurts. But the strongest kind of power doesn't need anger. It needs preparation. It needs the right documents, the right timeline, the right questions, and the patience to let the process do what it was designed to do. That's how you protect your family without losing yourself. And once the dust started settling, there was one more lesson that hit Ethan harder than any accusation. The money. The missing money. The way trust got used like a weapon. Ethan kept replaying the moment he signed those simple papers. The moment he handed over control because he thought it was the loving thing to do. That's when I told him what a lot of decent people learn too late. Good people think contracts are for bad people. They think paperwork is an insult. They think asking questions means you don't love someone. So they hand over money to family. They invest with a handshake. They mix love and business and hope it stays pure. But hope is not protection. And love without boundaries turns into regret fast. Money doesn't ruin families. A lack of principles does. If you're going to put money into something, especially with people you care about, there are 3 layers that keep you from being destroyed later. 1. Break it into steps. Don't dump everything in at once and call it trust. 2. Make it transparent. Where is it going? What is it for? Who can move it? And 3. Put it in writing. Not because you're accusing anyone, because you're respecting everyone. A contract doesn't say, "I don't trust you." A contract says, "I care enough about what we have to protect it if things change." Ethan wasn't wrong for believing his wife. He wasn't stupid for thinking family meant safety. He was living by an older code, the kind where your word is your bond. But this world doesn't always reward that code. So the lesson isn't to become cold, it's to become clear. Be kind, be generous, but don't be careless. Because the goal isn't to destroy the other side. The goal is to keep your children from paying for adult games. And when you do it the right way, quiet, structured, documented, you don't just win, you restore order, then you go home, and you stay a father. A week after the order changed, the house didn't feel like a courtroom anymore. It felt like a home that was still learning how to breathe. On Saturday morning, Lucas and Noah followed me into the garage like it was a secret clubhouse. I set a small wooden model on the workbench. Nothing fancy, just a little kit with tiny beams and a sheet of instructions folded too many times. Lucas ran his finger along the picture on the box. A house, he asked. A model, I said. We build it right. It stands. We rush it. It leans. Noah climbed onto a stool and leaned in close, like he could see the finished thing hiding inside the pieces. Ethan stood in the doorway. He didn't say much these days unless he had to. He just watched. His hands stayed in his pockets. His shoulders were lower than they used to be, like they'd been carrying weight for a long time. I handed Lucas a little square of sandpaper. Slow, I said. You don't force wood, you fit it. He nodded like he understood more than he should at his age. Noah held the tiny bottle of glue with both hands. Serious, careful, like it mattered, and it did. Piece by piece. The boys worked. They pressed 2 parts together and waited. They didn't shake it. They didn't test it. They let it set. The garage was quiet except for the scrape of sandpaper and the occasional, "Is this the right one?" When Lucas finally slid the roof piece into place, he smiled without looking up. "We did it," he said. Ethan's breath caught, not loud, just enough that I noticed. He stepped closer to the bench, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to. Noah turned and said, "Dad, look." Ethan leaned in, and for a second, the word Dad didn't sound like a title someone could argue about. It sounded like something real again. Ethan didn't touch the model at first. He just stared at it, then at his sons, then at me, and I could see what he was finally understanding. He hadn't just gotten time on a schedule back. He'd gotten his name back. That night, after the boys went to bed, Ethan stayed in the garage. He stood where they'd been standing. He looked at the little wooden house like it was proof of something. "I thought being decent was enough," he said. "It is." I told him. "It's just not armor. Being a good man isn't a mistake. Keeping your word isn't a weakness. Loving your kids with your whole chest isn't something you should apologize for. But if you live in a world where paperwork can erase you, you need principles that protect what you love." So here's what I want you to take from all of this. If you're in a fight you didn't start, don't fight it alone. Write things down. Save the messages. Keep the dates. Record what you're allowed to record. Ask the right professional the right question. And before you beg anyone to be fair, build the kind of stability no one can argue with. Because the truth doesn't need a performance. It needs a foundation. And a foundation, done right, doesn't just hold up a house, it holds up a family.